Today we're going to be making an abstract painting using some of those techniques you've been learning about on the previous lesson. Today we're going to be just incorporating, starting with a figure-ground relationship and moving forward with any other technique, color, or scheme that you want to be using or incorporating in today's assignment. So it's going to be a lot of freedom, and we want to stay as loose as possible just to practice some of those techniques, getting used to the paint, the consistency, actually breaking that consistency with water or matte medium, or doing the exact opposite and doing some dry brushing. So as we look around over at the studio over here, we're going to go through the tools, some of the techniques, and going to have a couple different sessions because we're going to also learn how to let things dry in between different techniques, because some techniques require time to happen. So without further ado, let's just go and look around the studio and see some of the things that we're going to be using today. All right, let's check it out. Okay, so today, a few things that you should be having. We have our water jar. We have our brushes and some interesting objects that we will be using for certain techniques, like a sponge. I even brought my fork from a kitchen. Just different kind of, different types of brushes, because we don't know exactly what we're going to be doing, but we're going to be having fun with a few different things. Water spritzer, which is always fun to have around. Some paper towels and some extra ones over here. This is the drawing paper that I already did a colored ground to start with, just so that this video could be as short as possible. I wouldn't want to have us waiting for it to dry while I was doing this. And then, of course, this is the palette that you may be familiar with over here, set up from the white to the raw umber, burnt sienna. Here I have a Payne's gray, which is transparent, a Mars black that is opaque, and going with our ultramarine blue to our cadmium red hue, which is very opaque, and the ultramarine blue is translucent. So we're going to talk about some of the stuff in between too, on how the opacity and translucent qualities of the paints will actually be useful for certain techniques. We've got some matte medium that we'll use, and a couple other just like blunt objects that we'll be using just to make some really interesting textures. And of course, the idea is that you can pretty much just use anything, is what that is kind of suggesting. So without further ado, let's get into it. So right now I have a blue kind of ground that I just painted very quickly on, just to start with something. Now what we're going to be doing is doing kind of a scratching of the surface and doing a couple wet techniques on top of this. So I'm just going to start out, and you could choose the colors that you would like to begin with. Right now, I thought rather than trying to make it too colorful, I already kind of mixed a little bit of this kind of, it's kind of just a white with a little bit of raw umber in there. And I want to see how that's going to be working. This is what I usually do to kind of get things moving a little bit, because this is very opaque. So I'm just using a little bit of water to kind of get that flowing. You can fill it with your brush. And I want to start by just kind of seeing how that you see how that is almost like a dry brush over here. The dry brushing means you get some of these kind of streaks that are happening. And now if I can water this down even more, that kind of dry brushing will kind of slowly go even more and more away. See how it's smoother now? And actually it goes through, the brush starts getting, it's not as loaded anymore. So the more water we do, the more smooth this is going to be, but also can you see that it's also more transparent as well. So there's a few good things about watering it down. It goes a lot further, but it also becomes more diluted and hence more translucent. So I kind of want to see what happens if I do this all throughout this piece, and just making sure that we're getting kind of different textures and consistencies all the way throughout. And I'm going to be doing a lot of different techniques on top of this, and sometimes the reason why I have this all set up like this, timing can be very important depending on how much time you want, how much time you take to actually get some of these things happening. So for instance, and it looks like I ran out a little bit of that paint to go all the way to the bottom, but we're going to do something else at the bottom there. See, it's a little bit more white now. And the titanium white is very, very opaque. So with that said, we're going to be kind of mixing just a little bit more together. And of course, the raw umber is very translucent as well, but when you mix it with when you're mixing it with the titanium white, it becomes opaque again. There we go. You can see even the blue. I didn't wait long enough completely for all that blue to really kind of settle in. Sometimes I think that I kind of waited about 15 minutes, which maybe was not long enough. Okay, so that was enough to kind of finish the paper. And now, while it's still wet, and this is sgraffito, I think that's the name of it, of scratching. It's an Italian word for to etch into. And here, you can use anything from the bottom of like your paintbrush, as you can see here. You can use something that has like, you know, it gets a little more texture. So for instance, if I wanted to scratch another couple things in like this, while it's wet, I can actually do that on top of the surface. Can you see that the thicker you also have this, that it reveals the lower layer. And this kind of allows different colors, different textures to come out. You can use also block features, such as like this huge block, and just kind of see what it does. I kind of like the idea of these big, like right here, maybe even bringing that down a little bit, see if it scratches in. And the cool thing about some of the block features is that you kind of don't know what it's going to do. So like right here, if I get an edge, it will go through. And if I want to bring back out this edge as well, I can bring it back out. There it is. And again, like I was saying before, if you wanted to do something more consistent as well, you just use your brush. I can add to that right there. It brings it back out. And you can keep on adding more and more textures. Now this is just the first beginning. We're going to put our brush in so it doesn't dry out. Just the beginning to just play around with a larger piece. And we're going to come right back once this dries again and add a little bit more to it each time. So we're starting out with just a colored ground. Then we went on with an opaque color, or in this case it was a titanium white with a little bit of burnt sienna and raw umber, which you can see some of that color. It's like a warmer, instead of white, there's a little bit of white right here, but it's a little bit more of a warmer white that's opaque. And then we can now go through and kind of see these colors coming under. And then after this, we're going to add more textures with more techniques. And I'm going to let that one dry, and we'll be right back. If you're at home, the best way of keeping your palette somewhat dry is to keep it a little bit moist. You can do that by misting with your water device, or you can actually use a moist sponge inside if you have bought one of these, you can put it inside this box. You would not want to put that down there like that, but you'd take it off and put this lid on with this sponge, and it could keep for days after that. So these kind of containers are actually really quite useful for keeping pellets wet for long periods of time. The cheapest way, of course, is due to that plastic food wrap right here. As you see, you can wrap that over. The thing that doesn't work so well with that is that it's going to be messing with your palette. It'll be pushing the colors together. So it's the cheapest alternative, but also, you know, easiest thing that you're gonna have around your house. Not everyone's gonna have these. They're about $30 to have a wet palette preserver. But you can get those, I believe at Blick for, I think they're about 25 for this size palette. Okay, so moving on, right here now this is dry. We're gonna try a couple other techniques. One is gonna be Alaprima, which is like wet on wet. So this is great because it can actually move pretty fast for what you'd want to be doing. And I'm going to be making some kind of a little bit more arbitrary choices. But one of the choices that I like doing when it comes to these kind of where you don't have to think too much about it, we started with a brightish blue background. We put an opaque lighter color or white on top of it in order to have these contrasts. You can do the exact opposite. You can do a like a darker, or I'm sorry, a lighter, brighter color underneath and do a darker tone on top and then scratch through that. So you can just flip it if you would like. Here I'm gonna use a little bit more darker tones because we have lighter tones. Now I'm gonna flip back to actually going into a darker palette again, bringing here, I'm going to add a little bit of white so that we can actually see how dark this is actually getting by, there we go. See, it wasn't that dark. So I'm going to add a little bit more of my Payne's Gray and maybe even get a little bit warmer. So I'm going to add a little bit of my orange here. That's keeping the saturation up while mixing some of these darker tones in it just to get that value. I want to get that value down a little bit. I'm not sure what this is going to look like here, but now using some of this as this painting that we've had, I can actually see this little column kind of almost going in between everything that we just created right there. So I'm kind of wanting to see where that actually goes. So I'm going to use a little bit of the Mars black because it's going to be much more opaque than the Payne's Gray, as we can see that. I think that's actually doing exactly what I want it to do now. So the idea now that I kind of really like about this is that it breaks with this side. That's why I want it to be a little bit darker. And then I'm kind of imagining it kind of going underneath this, like almost like this is wrapping around it. Now, nothing of this has to actually make actual sense. But it is kind of fun just to kind of like imagine this wrapping through and around. If you can kind of see that little pillar that I had of that white, and now instead I'm actually going to try to make it darker and almost going around. And I'm not sure what this shape is. And I'm not really making it to actually like figure out what it actually is. I'm just kind of like playing with the idea of this shape going in and through these kind of chords that I made with that fork. And you know, it doesn't have to even go down to the very, very bottom. I think I'm kind of just wanting to maybe, you know, make it kind of like little bits and pieces of something. I don't even know what that even is yet. And maybe what it will be, we'll figure it out as we go along here. Kind of like the idea of there being like bits and pieces of it. And you can consider this like right now being like dry brush. You can even like kind of scratch like along this little side right here. I'm kind of wanting to do that down here too. I'm not even sure what this is even gonna do to it, but getting some different techniques just flowing into that space. Kind of like what's going on right here now. And maybe a little bit more right over here. Okay, and now wet on wet. Now that this is still, you can give it a little bit of a spritz. I'm going to go with a lighter color on top of this. And so what I'm kind of thinking right now, I don't know why, but I'm really wanting to go a little bit lighter. So thinking like a little bit of this, get a little bit of brown into that, just because I want it to, there we go. And of course, as we put this in there, it's going to mix. So actually, I'm going to lighten it up a little bit. Here you can actually add, because wet on wet, if you have your matte medium. Matte medium is just going to allow it to flow a little bit better. It's thicker than water. It keeps the viscosity of the paint going. And here, now I'm going to try to see if I could just add some of the, right on top of the browns that we had going here. And I'm going to clean my brush and try to see if I can get a little bit more of that brightness towards the top. Yeah, there we go. Changing, altering kind of pressure. I kind of like that. Not sure what this, again, what it actually is and what it means. I'm not really kind of trying to even consider that. I'm just trying to make forms. And forms on top of forms. And seeing how the green is mixing with the brown, wet on wet. And you can see that, like, as it kind of goes over, it starts getting lighter and different tones start happening on the wet side as it goes towards the back. And I'm going to kind of move that on the bottom too, just to smooth out certain sections of it. And on this side right there. Okay, I'm going to try to move pretty fast here too. So now that that has kind of come about, which is kind of a little bit lighter, now we're going to try a couple other things. And I'm going to try to bring this over to maybe even making a little bit of a gray using. So now that we have some of these bright colors right there, I am going to try to see what will happen now if, there we go, this gray comes right over there and preserves some of these lines. And see how that's opaque? As I add water to it, that is now becoming translucent. So the paint is going much further, but also this opacity is actually allowing me to kind of see into the other layer again. And the next technique we're going to try to go on this is actually doing a glaze, which will be a lot of fun. That water actually worked very, very well for this side of it. I'm going to try to go down to even maybe right down here. Okay, so now we're kind of getting the different, and this would be considered a, if it was transparent, this would be considered a glaze. And what we can do even right here, because you see the blue, we can actually start using different tools. Like before we were using sgraffito to scratch. Now we can be using a sponge, which is kind of, this sponge is very abnormal, and maybe just trying to blot out some of the, there we go. So it's not as like, it's the brush strokes start going away, and you can see more of the under layer, which is that blue still, and that could be something that we want. It kind of adds a little bit more complexity. And of course we can actually take some of this and then put it over here too. As we can see, maybe if I can grab more of the paint with it, and now we're gonna go right on top. Can you see that? So now we're just added that lighter texture to that darker brown, which I think I kind of like. I kind of want to just incorporate it just a little bit right there as well. So now that we have like some of these grays coming out, I want to brighten it up again. So here we're gonna go do another thing. Get our brush. Where did I leave my brush? I should not have left it out. Wherever it is. Well, I'm going to use the big brush now. Oh, there it is. It was upside down. We're going to now clean that brush off. Always nice to clean it off between, especially if you want to go to a brighter color. Here, I think red is going to be something that I kind of want to try out and maybe do some blending here. So blending coming from this side. And I don't know where or what this is going to do now. I kind of like playing with this kind of pattern that I kept. And the great thing about using these kind of patterns is that I kind of don't know what it actually is, so I'm not really thinking too much about what I'm doing. I'm just trying to see how these are going to flow in together. And it looks like they're flowing in together pretty well. I'm going to use a little bit of water to thin it down though. So I'm going to move it right into each other. And very light, I'm actually taking some of the paint off, so as I move it into this, as you can see, this would be kind of considered another glaze as the red moves into that dark color. And by thinning it down, the red is actually somewhat opaque, so by thinning it down, now it's like it's being able to be translucent, and you get to see how that actually is mixing with the green. So here we're just, it's kind of an excuse to just make experiments. And the more loose we are, I feel the better the experimentation. So as you see, it was opaque at the top, and now I'm actually experimenting with it becoming looser and looser. And it's becoming a little bit more of a wash. So now anything that's kind of glazing on top of something else is kind of considered a wash on top of a solid color. Becomes like a glaze. Ooh, and you see that it actually picked up a lot of that brown that wasn't dry yet. I'm gonna leave that little piece like that. So some of those things are like, it wasn't intentional, but I still kind of like how it turned out. Now, if I can, I'm gonna try to blend another color with that red. I'm looking at this yellow, kind of thinking you're my ticket in, just to kind of see if I can, oh, there it is. Now the yellow is kind of acting the same. It's getting some more color happening, and I think I want to be more loose with it too. So maybe even bringing that color down. Ooh, I think I want it to actually be much brighter, like about that much brighter. Yeah. Okay. So now it's kind of turning into something that I kind of don't recognize, and that's great. It's a good place to be at sometimes. One other thing that we'd like to try out is going to be essentially doing more of a scumble, which is a lighter thing over a darker thing. It's kind of the opposite of a glaze. And we'll see if we can actually do that here on the top. And I'm going to get this a little bit wet. A scumble would, in this sense, would be really good with a little bit of, we're going to use a little bit of matte medium. The water might kind of take it down way too much for the consistency. And I'm going to try to maybe do that up and around here. And see, I'm not even sure what's even happening here. So I'm going to just bring it around. And there we go. That's the scumble. The scumble, so you can, it's a lighter thing that you can see on top of the former over here. And maybe just kind of, maybe use a little bit of water too. Let's see if that does an even better job. Yeah, there we go. See, you can even see. So it's a lighter color on top of a darker color, and a glaze is a darker color on top of a lighter color. So now we're kind of just doing the exact opposite and seeing how it plays around with these different shapes and forms. That's it, because I wanted to kind of keep it there. So kind of having some of that form still. I kind of got a little bit of paint on that. So I'm still trying to get this snaking form, and I wanted to do something with it as well as I kind of try to bring it back. Okay, so I think we're at a really good spot to kind of do some of that. Very well. That's looking great, actually. Should I bring some of it down over here? I don't think I can for right now. All right, I'm going to try to see if I can bring back that snaking form. Welcome back. Okay, as you can see, I took the liberty of actually kind of scumbling a little bit more over this snaking pattern. And I think I'm coming towards the end of the painting. I put a little couple grays and blues in there. So balancing it all out a little bit, a mixture of all the different types of techniques we've been using. To finish it off, I was kind of thinking this little lyrical line over here does not translate to the gray or this other stuff that's happening over here. So, just a couple final little things I feel for making a piece just kind of come to life. And having, there we go, like it doesn't have to even like, sometimes the idea of it kind of even like somewhat coming through a little bit is actually kind of neat right there. And another thing that I was looking at is that I would love for maybe this to incorporate the snake in a little bit more of this kind of snaking form. I was thinking of just trying to add a little bit more of, I'm going to say this darker green again, like right here, just to kind of cover it all up just a little bit and maybe get a little bit of that darkness happening again. The opacity of the Mars black really helps kind of cover it up, because I was thinking I really wanted to cover it, maybe not all of it, maybe just like pieces of it, maybe even to over here, and maybe even to like right there. Yeah, great. And then of course kind of go back over it with that same kind of wet on wet technique, and I think I'm going to go with a little bit more of that yellow and a little bit more again of the matte medium, and I feel that this could actually make it pop just a little bit more, having that same kind of, there we go. It will kind of brighten up that dull green that was happening on the other side when I was doing it before. So I'm going to try to kind of go over some of this other stuff just to brighten up some of that dull green. And I like how you can repeat by just repeating it, it kind of just makes it work. So now it's like becoming this like, you can kind of maybe even grab it and try to repeat it off to the side a little bit. And yes, I think this is where we're finally at, finding a balance and seeing how that actually is mixing quite well with the actual paint, kind of scattering. And also when you see that some of these things, when you're making light and dark, kind of lighter to darker colors, there's a little drip that's going down right now, which would be kind of fun if it goes all the way through that. That's one thing that I did not do, was a drip. So maybe that'd be the best way to finish everything, if I could actually find where I put that larger brush again. Somehow I am just so easy to losing these brushes. So maybe getting enough water, and it has to be pretty wet to drip, and see what that does. It could do it right over here since I have that. We'll see if it, there we go. It's actually kind of neat. Leaving a little bit. Yeah, it brightens it up pretty nicely. And a little drip that happened right there makes a nice little spot, if you can see that. So these are just trying out all these different techniques that we're going to try to just play around and have fun with throughout the semester. So I hope you have a wonderful time with this assignment. Again, this is just step by step of just you interacting with what you're doing. So I would try to leave it as loose as possible, and as you're working, try to think of differing your texture. If something's smooth, maybe make a rougher texture using a sponge, or something that's kind of unknown, where like you take a fork and move it around. It's kind of hard to plan that, and reacting to what you've done. And using different techniques, of course, different objects, brushes, anything you have laying around your house will work. And of course, working with light on dark, dark on light, and going back and forth. Hope you have a wonderful time on this assignment. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with.